Okay, thanks everyone.
Chair, can I just, sorry, if you've got an interpreter here, we're going to request, can people are going to walk past the interpreters? Can they not walk past the interpreters, go around? It's just a bit distracting when we're trying to interpret and everyone's trying to look at what we're doing. Can someone walking past? So if you could go around?
Sure. Okay, did everyone get that? People, when we're talking, if we can avoid working past the interpreters, the sign language interpreters who are on my left over here, because obviously it interferes with their line of sight in terms of our deaf colleagues being able to get the translation into BSL. So just bear that in mind, please. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to lunch, everybody. We're going to crack straight on. This afternoon we're going to have a brief presentation which will be about 15 minutes from Ellen Clifford. After that we'll have I'll let Ellen introduce that presentation. We'll then have time for a few questions before we move on to talking a session where we'll be looking at campaigning. Following that we'll have a brief 10-minute break, just a comfort break, and then we'll come back here for the last part of today. Simone, sorry? Yeah.
I noticed on the list of things, it's saying that update on current campaigns. And you know what? Alfie would absolutely love it if we were able to share, particularly with the Children Families Will and the SEM reforms. There are some prior things going on in terms of attacks on input of disabled rights and education. But any opportunity to have that.
That you will have, Simone, we have you down on the list already, you'll be pleased to know. Alfie's already down, obviously, as part of that. So when we come into the campaign section, that'll be the opportunity. Fantastic, thank you. Okay, if we're okay, then if we move straight on to the presentation, and I'll just hand over to Ellen Clifford from National DPAC Croydon. Thank you, Ellen.
Thanks, Roger. And sorry we couldn't do the slides this morning, but it turns out that none of our student contacts paid the university enough money to have access to the full range of Wi-Fi privileges, which we didn't have Wi-Fi when I was at uni, so I had no idea it worked like that. But anyway, so I think Roger probably covered quite a bit of the background this morning, but basically, for those of you who are new to DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts set up in 2010, and it was during the run-up to the protest at the Tory Party conference in Birmingham that a group of Midlands activists got together and worked with the Right to Work campaign on disabled people leading the march in Birmingham. And disabled people from around the country came to that march, and they were at the front of the march despite the weather. And that really showed the mood, and that disabled people were realising already by October 2010 what the Tory government meant for disabled people, and that they wanted a coordinated resistance to the attacks on disabled people. The disabled activists who were involved at that time found a number of issues with just organising that protest. The police told them that there would be problems, what would happen if their wheelchairs got punctures, that vulnerable people shouldn't be allowed to protest. So already the issues were coming thick and fast about disabled people mobilising and negative attitudes towards empowered disabled people. From that initial grouping of activists, DPAC was set up. The co-founders had a very strong philosophy when they were setting up Disabled People Against Cuts. And DPAC has always been strongly a social model campaign. We're not an organisation, we're a campaign. So the social model is the idea that it's society that disables us, that there's nothing wrong with us as disabled people, that it's society that's got the problem that needs to change to include us. So there have been issues within the current campaigning, because I think you'll hear a lot of times when people are opposing the cuts, they use terms like vulnerable people. Now actually, from a social model approach, we don't like the word vulnerable, because it's not us who have something inherently vulnerable about us. It's the risks that society exposes us to by not understanding and including us. So you can see that by being social model, there are issues that we face day to day in being engaged in the wider campaign. Disabled People Against Cuts follows the principle of rights, not charity. So there have been tensions with things like how we work with, whether we work with the big charities that tend to be involved very much in the lobbying side of things, but the charities who Disabled People Against Cuts see as being complicit in the oppression of disabled people and perpetuating that oppression through concentrating on their service delivery and their own interests. So, for example, through the work programme, we've seen charities actually having contracts under that, whereas DPAC was trying to fight the work programme. Disabled People Against Cuts has always been clear that we do work with the left. We work with trade unions, we work with anti-cuts groups, and we work with the wider anti-austerity movement. And that has been controversial, particularly when DPAC was founded. A lot of the co-founders heard, we don't want to work with those lefties. But if you're involved in DPAC, then that's what we're about. DPAC is very much from the position that there are enough people inside the tent and they're not getting very far. So we're outside the tent, and that's where we're proud to be. So the development of DPAC's activities, to start with, beyond that initial march, it was very much focused on online activism. As well as the protests and actions, we were very strong on the online side. We very quickly had a website and were using social media such as Facebook and tweeting. Now actually, those of you who know the DPAC website will know that that's kind of beyond capacity now, and it's quite difficult to find things, which is why we're very grateful to Inclusion London, who are supporting London DPAC and who will be offering us some space on their website to help put static information, because the DPAC website is very good at putting posts up and having people comment, but it's quite difficult to keep information there, for example, on what is a social model of disability that people can then easily find. One of the first things DPAC was involved in was working with the TUC on the initial march, which was the 26th of March. What year was that now? Was that 2011?
2011.
2011, thank you. And one of the things that DPAC was involved in was a virtual protest page, so that people who couldn't actually come on the march were able to put a flag on the page and to show that they supported it. So it was recognising the fact that disabled people support what we're doing, they support the fight against the cuts, but they're not able always to actually physically get to places. And actually that shouldn't stop people from being involved, going back to the point that Simone made earlier about armchair activism. Local groups actually then kind of sporadically set up without the co-founders actually ever having intended it to get that far. But that was because of the mood. There was a mood of resistance among disabled people. And disabled people felt that their own organisations, disabled people's organisations, weren't showing the leadership in fighting the government that they wanted. So we found, for example, Islington. Islington's always had a history of being a strong borough for resistance. And Islington, for example, set up a Disabled People Against Cuts group. There was a London Disabled People Against Cuts group. And those groups rightly looked to the DPAC national co-founders and said, maybe we should think about having a structure. How do we have a voice? How do we all work together? So over the summer of 2011, the co-founders started working more widely, set up a membership. We now have, I looked last week and we had 900 individual members who have signed up, and that's without ever having done a membership drive or anything, targeted to get people to join. We've got something like 8,000 followers on Twitter, and I don't know Facebook, the number of people. 3,500 people on the Facebook group page. So I think that's people just being attracted to what DPAC is doing and wanting to be part of it. We also had a national conference in October 2011, and that was where we got the steering group that we currently have from. So it's an elected steering group that's made up of disabled people from around the country. And we have here today Rob, Roger and I from the National Steering Committee, and Andy Green sends his apologies. So the aim of Disabled People Against Cuts is to resist the cuts. There are wins that we've been able to make, small wins over the last couple of years. For example, the mobility component of disability living allowance was going to be taken away from people in residential care. There was a lot of fight over that. One of the things that came out of the anti-ATOS week of action that we did was that cancer sufferers, the period that they would be allowed to receive for ESA was extended. So there have been very small wins that we've been able to take along the way. but generally it's about contributing to a climate of resistance, because we recognise that we might get small wins along the way, but the bigger picture of what's happening is very, very serious. We've been very concerned with raising awareness to counter government propaganda about benefit scroungers that has been very pernicious and has, until fairly recently, I think there's been a bit of a sea change lately, but I think that it was very successful. People were saying we need welfare reform because there's huge numbers of these benefit scroungers out there. And Inclusion London commissioned some research which showed that of focus groups, members of the public thought the benefit reform was something like 70% rather than the 0.5% that it actually is. We've also got an aim of re-radicalising the disabled people's movement, rebuilding confidence and skills for resistance. Because I think basically people forgot how to campaign, our organisations. They've got used to having contracts with local government. We've become service providers because disabled people are the best people to run services for other disabled people. But we've forgotten how to get out on the streets and chain ourselves. So, I mean, last year we had, I think every 2 months we were chaining ourselves to something. But that took time to build people's confidence, to learn skills to do that. UK Uncut were very helpful. Veterans of Dan came on board and helped us to relearn those skills. And the idea is that we should learn and we should share those skills and we should make sure that we remember them so that for future periods of attack, after this one is over, we won't be left unprepared. DPAC is about building a vision for a better society, so not just saying what we're against, but actually thinking about the kind of society that we want to be part of. And I think one of the, maybe for me, unexpected outcomes of the work that DPAC's involved in has been very strong peer support and solidarity. So where individuals are being called up for their work capability assessment, for example, there are other people in DPAC who've been through that, who can speak to people and say, not give professional welfare advice, but can say, this is what it was like for me. Oh dear. That's just like, that was the last slide, so that's okay. And just a sense of solidarity, so that where we're facing all these multiple attacks, we can actually go and we can go outside the High Court and spend an hour chanting and actually feel better about things. Let's come back. Okay, have I got time?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, well, okay. So these were just some photos of the closing act of ceremony. That is you, Deborah. And the week of action. So we're probably best known for the direct action, but actually that's not the only way that you can campaign. So there's direct actions, there's online activism, and that's a picture of the TUC virtual protest map that DPAC put up for the TUC. Lobbying politicians, so we've held a number of lobbies, for example, on the Independent Living Fund in Parliament. There's research and writing. We're always looking for people who want to write articles for the DPAC website. One of the most important papers that I think DPAC's done is one by Debbie Jolly called A Tale of Two Models, which looks at the links between Atos, UNAM, Department for Work and Pensions, in creating this biopsychosocial model of disability, which is what the work capability assessment is founded on, and which says that disability is in our heads basically, and if we tried a bit harder, then we manage to do a little bit more. And I think it's really, really dangerous, and I think that disabled people haven't been really aware of this threat that's been coming while New Labour was setting up the Office for Disability Issues that was championing the social model. Meanwhile, senior people in the DWP were working with these insurance companies that have been thrown out of several states in the US for, in the words of judges, operating categories of disability denial and creating this biopsychosocial model. So I think it's really important that that's been exposed, and I really think the work Debbie's done on that has been important. Okay. We've also done a lot of work with the media, and that's about raising the public's awareness of what's happening, and that actually it's not people who are scrounging who are being hit by these cuts, but it's genuine disabled people who are being targeted, the poorest people in society being targeted by this government for a financial crisis we didn't cause.